Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Tongue Eater, Mage Errant Book 6, chapters 16, 17, 18, and 19. Hasty Descent, The Final Exam, Deeper and Darker, and Dead Languages. In these chapters, our friends descend back into the labyrinth, and instead of encountering again the things that I had seen before, which is what I expected, Bierce lampshades my expecting that, which, well played, sir. Welcome to Unspoiled. Wait, Spoil Me. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Dan for commissioning this episode. So to start things off, I just really quickly, for any of you who come to the lives, want to let you know that because Crowdcast is going to be changing over officially to its version 2 style events of for the whole website in September, all of the events are going to have to be moved to brand new style locations. And so I think if you're in here, I think this one is the new style. And so we're good here. But if you haven't already registered for this place, it may be kind of confusing why I'm here and not in the normal slot. So forgive me on that if you're confused, but it was something that I had intended to take care of tomorrow, and Candace had initiative and took care of it today, which I didn't expect, or I would have alerted everybody. I just sent out a notification to my followers, and hopefully that is enough. But just, if anybody is confused. So don't blame me. I'm so sorry. Blame Crowdcast, because this has been a little bit more messy than I think anybody expected. So I'm pretty stoked, though, to talk about these chapters, because I'll be honest, so the whole vibe of this book in particular is the training wheels are off. Everybody who was teaching our friends is now either dead or just taken out of the equation in terms of overall support. And I feel like I was really excited to cover them getting to go out on their own and do their own thing without any, what's the word? Supervision isn't quite the same. I guess mentorship, or what I really want to say is without any sort of backdoor. The energy whenever you've got a group of kids, and even if they are handling their shit, there are adults with more experience and more connections and more abilities around. There's always a sort of vibe of, well, if it gets too bad, somebody will step in and take care of it. There's a feeling of authority being ultimately what folks will have to deal with. And I am a little disappointed, I think, that we're going back into the labyrinth, because it's not them against other people yet. It's them against these creatures, which are sometimes intelligent, sometimes not. But then things end with them going into another world. And I don't know if there's supposed to be anything intelligent, or how they've determined which world they're going to, how any of that works. So what I'm saying is I had an expectation of what it was going to look like for our friends to be sort of let let off the leash. And it almost immediately when I am about to get what I wanted, instead of like going out into the big wide world, they go back somewhere they've been before. And like I said, when I was recording last time, I was expecting that maybe we would see some evidence of the leveling up. And so we would come across creatures that we had seen before and deal with them again and see how much our friends have grown in power or in like ability to work together as a team. I'm not mad that I didn't get it, but I do feel like I had a little bit less fun in the labyrinth itself than I was expecting to. And I'm really curious how other folks feel about the labyrinth overall, because it's the sort of thing that I want to be a little bit weirder than it is. And I know that that is saying something kind of, I'm trying to think how to put this. Dan is here. Hi, Dan. Yes. I'm so sorry, Dan, I said in the beginning, but Crowdcast is changing over all of their events, and we had to create a whole new event schedule over here in the new version. So I'm sorry I didn't notify you sooner. But I didn't realize that it had been done because Candace is doing it. So anyway, I think what it is that Bierce kind of got my expectations up because of the wildness of the library, and how incredibly strange the sentient books and the way the index functions and all of that. I want the labyrinth to be as bizarre as the library in some ways. And I guess it's just my expectation is the problem, because the library functions in a very different way. So Dan is in the chat saying, just be patient, stranger things to come. Yeah, I imagine. So this beginning, it really isn't about, it's mostly about the way our friends are kind of coping with being down here again. And each of them is going through their own individual sort of like series of revelations. So we start off with Godric's POV. And I really enjoy this armor elemental and how he can feel its reactions to things. Eventually, he puts it away and he can distinctly feel that it's disappointed. And he's like, oh man, I really have to use it more. And I would completely be this way. I mean, I'm kind of this way with like objects that do not have any sentience whatsoever already. There was a TikTok where a girl pretended to be the mug at the back of your cupboard, waiting for you to use her. And every day you kept picking the same like 2 mugs, but you never reached to the back of the cupboard and picked her. And she was just waiting for you to like love her. And you just never did, because you have 2 favorites and those are all you use. And when I tell you, that made me literally go get a mug from the back of my cupboard to use. Like it really gave a shit. I am not playing around. It got to me. So the idea of this armor just being like, oh, I thought we were gonna, no? Okay. It would break my heart and I would fucking never take it off. It would be awful. So anyway, it says the labyrinth felt different this time than he'd ever felt it before. No one had been here in weeks. The gates had all been locked up before the battle and hadn't been reopened yet. It was noisy, but not in a way that made the labyrinth feel angry like the library. It just felt alive, like the jungles of the Elosa River Delta. And what we find out is the battle sucked up so much mana that a lot of creatures that need more mana, like, to survive, evidently are kind of like coming up to the surface, like they're feeding closer up. And so this is like a weird normally they're further down, but because of the way things have gone with the battle changing the supply, it's really altered the level of creature that they are going to run into. And Talia is being really sort of complacent about coming back here again. She says, we're on the first floor. We have mackerel covering us. We don't need to be in formation. It's fine. What she wants to do is talk to Godric about the fact that he avoided her brother and then took off and literally never talked to him. And Godric is like, I guess it was pretty rude that I didn't. I probably should. And yet, even though he's saying it, there's not a very strong sense that he wishes he could go back and change things. It's a much stronger, like, I should want to go back and be better. And I just don't. Which I really understand. Is when you are going through anything that's sort of like draining, the way that grief can be, or if you've got like emergency situations, you have got to preserve your sanity by rationing your energy, and some things are just not worth it. And you feel like, I wish I wasn't in this situation so that it would be worth it for me to deal with that right now. But that's not the, current setup. So I guess I've got to deal with the fact that I can't muster up the energy to even give a shit about that, really, I appreciate Talia saying that nobody's expecting him to be perfect right now, because that's really giving him a lot of grace. She's just kind of like, did you talk to him or not? When he apologizes like a couple times, she assures him basically, I'm sure he'll be fine. I just wondered, and he knows what you're going through. It's understandable. So then we get this wonderful moment where the kids run across a possum. And I love it. Hugh and Talia have both seen it before. Like, they've not it before, them. They've seen possums. And Godric and Sabe are like, how did you just walk by this? It's hideous. It's horrifying. And they're both like, they're totally harmless. It's fine. They're just... You guys, I am somebody, I stand for possums and I stand for spiders. I love me a possum. They are so maligned, and they are, one, so like sweet. They do not like attack, they are, I think their like body temperature is too low or too high to carry rabies, so they are not rabid, and they eat pest like insects and stuff, and are just generally like kind of dope. Oh, there's a bunch of stuff Dan saying in the chat. Opossums are so fucking weird. If you're gonna pick an alien animal, opossums and platypus are the two to choose from. It's they are like, I have, for a period here in our carport, we were feeding the local stray cats, and there were a whole band of raccoons and opossums that would roll out and feed at the cat food bowls, and the opossums were just so chill. They were sweet. So anyway, there's this moment where Hugh says, my youngest cousin used to catch them in the woods, then bring them back home and dress them up to hold tea parties with them. I just really want to take a moment to think about, if you're a person and there's some like larger creature out there and it captures you and you're like, oh my God, is it going to eat me? Is it going to kill me? And instead it just dresses you up and makes you play in like a demented tea party. That's like serial killer behavior. But because it's opossums, it's just supposed to be like, oh yeah, it's fine. And I really hate that for them. Those poor opossums must have been So stressed out. Oh, God. Anyway. And Talia, I think they're cute. She is correct. So this is when we have a little conversation about like her tattoos and the fact that they didn't give her an artificial fire affinity. And it turns out they wouldn't have worked it has to be natural or else the tattoos would not have done anything. And also they could interact really badly and she could potentially blow up, which it had not occurred to me about the fact that you can develop artificial affinities, that maybe you could just like make yourself have one to fit in with your family better. Like, that's a wild idea and apparently looked down on, which is not surprising, but it never entered my mind, even though we know that people can do that. So then they get to this room that has a kraken in it. And this is a sort of, for me, I'm feeling like there's something else going on here, because the kraken is not doing awesome. Later on, Godric notes that it's got sores on it and some of its scales are falling off. And his theory is that the lake is fresh water and it's a saltwater creature. So it may be, what Hugh suggests is that like it got pulled into here by the labyrinth and doesn't belong here, which sucks for the kraken. But also there's a whole thing later with these weird sort of demon things. And I'm really starting to wonder if there's something else happening, or if maybe the kraken being pulled in is more the symptom. Because I'm looking at like the fact that it seems ill, maybe being, a signal that something is going wrong. But it's maybe just the fact that the kraken is here at all that I should be more worried about. So this thing has tentacles with fangs instead of suckers, which apparently that's what makes them arms, is if they have suckers, Godric says later, which I don't think I knew that. So that's helpful. Thank you. And they usually have 12, which is a lot. So they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, because it turns out that there is the way that they have to go is on the island in the center of the lake where this kraken is, which is pretty much like close to worst case scenario. As they're talking about this, by the way, Talia keeps calling them krakens, and I love that Mackerel flips open to correct her, and Godric like shuts it real quick before she can notice. I really can't help but love. I have a real struggle within myself where I understand the classism and ableism inherent to policing language, right? If you come at somebody and you're like, oh, you used the wrong your, literally, who cares? You know what they said. You get what they mean. But I also really hate when people use words wrong. It's like an itch or something. Do you know what I mean? And so even though I have learned to just keep that shit to myself mostly, there is a like in my brain, just oh, he just said it again. Like when people say supposedly, or she could care less. It's supposed to be she couldn't care less. Like she cares so little. There's not any less she could care. Like things like that. And my favorite is when people mistake could have or would have for would of, OF. If I had a mackerel around me that could just open up and correct people, it would be such a lovely little loophole where it's not me being the asshole. It's just the book doing what it does because that's its function and you can't get mad at me for it. I would really enjoy this in a way that would feel like an indulgence. It would be a guilty pleasure. So anyway, Miss T says, found you. Yeah, sorry. I mentioned at the top why, but it's the whole thing with Crowdcast. Dan says, saying theory instead of hypothesis drives me up the wall. Oh, right. You know what, Dan? Like, how strict are you on that? I feel like I probably say theory a whole lot, but I don't know if I'm using it wrong when I do or not. I have to assume I'm getting it wrong at least some of the time. But anyway, so yeah, this is just kind of like a sort of cheat where you get to have the satisfaction of correcting a person, but it's not you doing it. And Godric can feel the elemental running its senses across the tunnels around them. He wasn't sure whether it was due to the close call with the Kraken, the labyrinth, or just thanks to it being older, but the difference was palpable. He also couldn't help but notice that the elemental's mana reservoirs were growing as well, taking on more and more of the burden of maintaining his armor. He still had to handle the bulk of it, but if the elemental's reservoirs kept growing at the rate they were, it might be able to handle his armor all on its own in a few years. Which is pretty cool. I feel like he needs to name his armor. Did he name it already and I forgot? Because it just seems like it's got to be given its own name pretty soon. He's going to be talking about it in a way that it would just simplify things. So, what they decide to do is Hugh is going to give the ward to Godric to embed in the stone. And let's see. Godric ended up doing a surprising amount of work. Godric could recrystallize stone like Hugh did, but while there was enough overlap between stone and crystal affinities to do that, it would still be exhaustingly difficult. Far easier to just use stone magic techniques to carve the ward. So he has to figure out exactly how to design this, and eventually it's just a repeating pattern, so he gets faster and faster as it continues on. The most nerve-wracking part of the plan for Godric was that he'd have to take his armor off. His mana reservoirs had grown immensely, but his armor weighed more than all of them put together. Trying to support it in a suspended ward tunnel would drain his reservoirs unnecessarily fast. So he begins to go through it, and this is when he notices the Kraken doesn't seem to look too good. They manage to get past the Kraken. It's really not a big problem. They only had 3 scares along the way. The first was when they stepped into the first ward segment that lifted off the ground. It held fine, but that didn't stop Godric from holding his breath. The second was halfway through the trip over the lake when a sudden curve in the cave wall put its stone too far away for Godric to carve more ward spell forms into it. And so he has to do it into the lake bed. The final scare came when they were almost to the island. It was as though the Kraken could tell there was something wrong, because it started feeling around in the air with its tentacles as if searching for them. And I don't know, guys, maybe I'm just being paranoid, but there is something about that just bothers me. So they managed to get out of there, and just before the Kraken gets them, it's a second, and they would have been smashed probably. Let's see, here it is. He forced himself to breathe slowly, then fashioned one final attention ward, hiding the approach down to the mana vent. He slowly nodded to each of the others to make sure they were ready, and assembled a levitation spell form in his mind's eye. Then he collapsed the ward tunnel beneath them, and they drifted slowly down into the depths of the labyrinth, toward the 5th floor, the floor where Godric had almost died their first year. And what we've got going here is, he's got some trauma from that, as you would. You almost died. And you weren't supposed to be down here. The whole thing was not, you know what I'm saying? So later on, he's looking a little bit jumpy, And Hugh is like, what's going on? And he won't answer him, and Hugh has to really push him. Until finally Godric's like, look, I know it's stupid, but I keep worrying that we're going to like wind up back in that room again. And I really loved Sabe being like, dude, everybody like got very fucked up in that room. Like a lot of specific things happened there. It is not silly that you're concerned about it. Like, of course you are. And, you know, that doesn't mean that we can avoid it. If the best way to get further down is through there, that's what we're going to have to do. And it may do us good to face it. But don't think for a second that you're the only one that's kind of like feeling a little bit of apprehension about it. And it's just a really small thing that I like, where Sabe doesn't tell him that there's nothing to worry about or we've got your back or anything like that. All she needs to say is like, yeah, we get it. And sometimes that's really all it is. You know, being supportive doesn't mean that you actually can materially do something to change someone's situation. It means that you're there for your friend in the capacity that they need you to be there. And it isn't necessarily a like practical thing that they can do to change what's going on, but simply knowing there's somebody listening who is giving them room to be emotional about whatever it is can help you to get through it to the other side. Because when you try and hide feeling like this, you're never actually coping with it because you're feeling a lot of shame, you know? And so what you're really grappling with is this sense of shame instead of the feeling itself. And, you know, ask me how I know. So let's see, the fact that he could, oh, right. This is when we're in Hugh's POV in the next chapter. And he does not like being levitated. It's really freaking him out. Then he sees a bunch of the spell forms and he can read them. And he is bothered by it. The first labyrinths had been grown countless eons ago by the long-vanished labyrinth builders, who likely had never even come close to Anastas or had ever mastered Anastan affinity magic. He'd read Galvacrin's claims in one of his books that the labyrinths adapted to the magics of their host universes, but doing so and developing spell forms that were recognizably part of spell casting traditions, that beggared belief. And so he's looking around and he's just like, this is just like the spell forms that we use look the way they do because of just the way we decided to design them. It's not like spell forms have to look this way. And the fact that these do, there's something else going on here. Hugh didn't like any of the possible conclusions that line of thought led toward. Yeah, I am really wondering about this. Like, I don't even know what direction to go in, but noted. So this is when Hugh mentions that the Kraken might have been dragged against its will. Labyrinth overlays some part of another world and drags creatures and stuff back in with it. There have only been a handful of cases in recorded history of that happening, and it mostly happens in the middle of nowhere. I've only heard of one case of it happening in a crowded city, and that was a couple centuries back. And I don't know, man. Like, I just feel like that's not what this is, but maybe, I don't know. So, the conversation about being worried about going back into that room, Talia says something about how, like, if we were in a story, we would go back there for the sake of narrative catharsis, which is a wonderful phrase that I don't think I've ever heard before and will be using so much. So just get ready for me to completely steal that. So back to the traveling here. On their first visit to this floor, they'd only faced a swarm of flying crabs, their giant parent, and some sort of horrid wolf creature with far too many mouths. Almost all of them had almost killed them. Hugh and the others were far more powerful than they'd been before. Even with his magic barely working, Hugh was better armed, and he had been expecting things to be almost easy for them. They'd had it easy their first time on the 5th floor. And I was like, oh no. Because I was really like, yeah, breeze, no problem. And evidently, it was just, that wasn't like, last time they were here, they were having an off day. I don't like it. That bummed me out a little bit. So there are these creatures that I am having such a hard time imagining. The way they're described, it was as if some mad mage had taken hyenas, sewn a trio of them back to back, then stretched out their bodies 20 feet into radially symmetric furred centipedes with dozens of furred legs in 6 even rows. When I tell you, my brain breaks just trying to picture that. And there's so much more about than later. He calls them hyena worms. They were a monstrous hole. Their 3 jaws opened into a single central mouth lined with hundreds of fangs stretching backward. Each fang flexed and twisted independently of all the others. I don't even know how to imagine a fang that's flexing and twisting. Like, literally, why would it do that? Is it meant to be sort of like, you know, the food goes in the middle and then it just turns on like a garbage disposal, and so the fangs are more like grinding? I don't know. So, and then it ends, guys. Their legs all had different numbers of joints, bending in seemingly random directions, each of which ended in a bizarre clump of tendrils and claws that let them freely clamber along walls and ceilings, which, if I didn't already hate the many legs aspect, the fact that they bend in random directions, there's nothing like particularly organized about them, that was part of it. And then he's like, oh yeah, and tentacles. And then I'm just like, all right, count me out. I'm out. I'm sorry, I'm out. That's it for me. That's a no. That's a no from me. They had at least a dozen eyes, largely clustered in between the jaws. It would have been less horrifying if the eyes were insectile instead of being utterly normal mammalian eyes. And I am just gonna nope right the fuck on past this. So our friends deal with it. And I hated it. And this is when Hugh is like, I don't know, they feel like demons. Something about this is bizarre. And he says that it's probably from an ether-critical universe. And when Godric is like, but don't demons fuck around with spell forms and like make them less effective? They're not doing that. And he was like, I don't really know what to tell you. All I can say is that I'm getting the same sense off of them that I did from Bakori. So, guys, it's just so creepy. Let's see. I'm not sure we even actually injured any of them. These things are light for their size, but ridiculously durable. That one has a broken leg and another has a burn, but you're right. We haven't done much. I think I may have an idea, Talia offered. And I was like, what's she gonna do? So she uses some darts, bone darts. Almost instantly after the needle shot out of the end of the blowgun, it glowed with bone fire, especially the thicker rear end. The needle grew in size, and the end erupted in flame, propelling the needle at astonishing speed. And I was like, word, she's just got little rockets. It shot through the ward, corkscrewing slightly in the air, then slammed into the back of a centipede worm, already the size of a dagger. It ground to a halt less than a third of the way into its length, but only for a moment. The needle kept growing. The end kept firing flames, digging the bone needle in farther with every passing heartbeat. The hyena worm had just started screaming when the now spear-sized needle detonated, severing the back third of its long body. A few bone embers bounced off the spinning ward, but most went flying outwards from the sides of the bone needle. These needles are hard to aim. I was trying for its head, Talia offered. Several other hyena worms crawled over the dead one, inspecting it carefully. Then they all released painfully loud whistles, and the chamber emptied. And I honestly kind of was living for that. These creatures are like, I don't think we want this smoke. I'm good. You good? Let's just head back inside the bar and have another drink. Let's leave this alone. I really enjoy this a lot. I do want to draw your attention, though, to another weird instance of how often John Bierce uses the same words over and over again. Have you noticed that when I've quoted Talia, it says Talia offered more than once, which is just a bizarre way to say that somebody said something. I get it that just using the word said, exclaimed, yelled, whatever, those get tiresome, and maybe she isn't raising her voice, so some of them don't apply. So you have to get a little bit more creative sometimes. But offered is like very specific in what it's doing. And these needles are hard to aim. I was trying for its head, Talia offered. I don't feel like that's the right word. And I noticed there's another point again where she says it. I just typed in Talia offered into the word search, and he uses that 7 times. Talia offered. And I don't get why he decided that was like such a good word to replace it with. And I'm just looking at offered, and apparently Talia isn't the only one. Everybody's offering, but she is the one that seems to be using offered the most in these chapters, because I really noticed it. So let's see. We've got Talia offered 7 times. Let's see how much Hugh offers. 4 times. Sabe. And just, I just 3 times for Sabe. I just find it weird because it's not the way that I would use that word. Godric 4. So Talia by far the most. Just don't like it. And I just wanted to address it because it's like distracting to me. But it doesn't matter. I just found myself when I was reading kind of stopping every time I hit it. And the first time I stopped because I thought the word offered was just a strange choice. And then I started to stop again because I realized, didn't I just read this? And yes, I had. So anyway, it's not like a big deal. It's just a sort of like little distracting thing that would be so easy to like tweak. And that's kind of, I think, what like drives me nuts a little bit with his use, like repetitive use of words, is that it would be so easy to change it. The other one is that in this section, the word terrifyingly is used a few times. And it's like terrifyingly is a fine word. I actually think it is very effective depending on how, like, the context of it. He uses terrifyingly in this book 29 times. Sir, I am gonna need you to get a thesaurus. You have got options. You don't need to do this. It's fine. But anyway, it's fine. So this like new weapon that she's got, I'm very into it. I like it. I think it's cool. I think it's like, it's so dramatic, you know, and it's a nice ranged weapon, which can be a little bit tricky sometimes. I just really thought it was dope, and also was very happy that the creatures all just leave. Although Talia is sort of like, oh, I thought I would get to use more of these. Oh, okay, I guess we're done. They're retreating to some sort of nest, and I was like, ugh. I don't know why, but you call things like a nest or a hive, and I'm out. I do not like that. Now we go to 18, deeper and darker. The rest of the 5th floor was, well, still nightmarish, but nothing quite as dangerous as the hyena worms came after them. Hugh is struggling again with feeling useless, although they do come across some other creature that he manages to, like, he's still, you know, using the tools he's made, he is still helpful. It's just sort of like a, you know, I think it's just sort of like a mental reaction. And there's a fish that's swimming through the air. The other's armor was enough to protect them from the noxious smoke, but all Hugh had was a pre-made ward mask that was barely up for the job. By the time Sabe chased down the fish, grabbing it with her adhesive shield and bashing it repeatedly against the wall, Hugh was choking and hacking violently. I felt for him here so bad. The breathing thing, and the fact that it's like pretty much guaranteed he's never going to get back to his full capability, that sucks. It just does. And I'm hoping that he can find some way to heal, but there is nothing more frustrating than having been able to do something and now you can't. I don't care what it is. It's just knowing that now you can't do the thing that used to be not only something you could manage, but that you didn't even think about. That's the worst kind. Is like shit that you just gave no thought. And you start to be like, oh wow, I really should have appreciated that a lot more than I do now. So there's a bunch of traps on this floor. The sheer number of traps was one of the strangest features of labyrinths. The leading theory was the labyrinth builders had put them in to minimize the flow of invasive species, but there was really no way to know anything about that long-vanished civilization. Which way next? Hugh looked at Mackerel, but instead of sending him a vision of the path, the spell book shook violently. You can't stay neutral forever, Kiata. I can, and I will. My duties go beyond your petty factional infighting. More, so far as I've seen, your behavior has violated the treaty between Kandaron and your faction far worse than she ever did. The consequences lie on your own head, Ikola. Oops, so sorry, I just whacked my mic. Sabe hissed over his shoulder, and he realized his friends had crowded around him to read as well. Ikola's the surviving Havathi Duark, Sabe hissed. Do you notice this? Sabe hissed over his shoulder, and then she says something. But it doesn't say she said it. It says Sabe hissed. Maybe it's a different Ikola? Talia offered. I'm just saying. It's distracting, that's all. What does the treaty matter now that Kandaron is dead? Power is all that matters in the end, Kiata, and there are none left on the council with both the will and the power to oppose our plans for Ithos. What an ephemeral thing to say, Ikola. No surprise, of course. You are ephemeral. And your may-fly little life doesn't give you any reason to worry over the value of your word. It's different for those of us who live lifespans worthy of the name. There is little currency more valuable than the oaths of those with proper lifespans. I will not devalue my word, and I will not break my oath as a witness to your little treaty. And for all your claims to power, you still come begging to me for aid weathering the consequences of a fight you picked. And even if Candoran truly is dead, her plans aren't. She created hundreds of liches across the continent, all with a vested interest in opposing you. And that's hardly the sum of her plans that will outlive her. No, I'm well off staying out of all this. I live for this. I just like, there's something about the like, I'm going to just like pat you on your head and send you on your way. That it's, yeah, you may not value your word because, let's be honest, you're a puny nothing and you don't matter and you're like never going to matter. And then you'll die not having mattered. Sucks. Sorry about it. Not my problem. I, however, have a reputation that is significant in any way compared to you. And I'm just going to go ahead and keep giving a shit about my reputation. You can do what you want because ultimately, who gives a fuck what you do? You are nobody. But I can't just wander around breaking oaths and doing what the fuck I feel like because I have made promises that matter. So, bye. Oh man, I love it. 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 It's so accurate. That's the thing. It makes perfect sense. Like, what about that isn't completely true? It's the sort of thing like with dealing with the Fae in a lot of fiction where the Fae have very specific rules that they have to live within. And it's like a compulsion almost, you know? But as you like begin to look at the bigger picture, it starts to become apparent that it's sort of like, well, if we didn't have this, then what would we have? Everybody would just do whatever, you know? And you see evidence of this in something like Song of Ice and Fire, where the oaths of hospitality are broken by a particular family. And now that entire family is just seen as people who their word is worthless. And they can't get the kinds of backing and support ever again. Like the entire worth of a house's name and pedigree is, well, how much can I rely on you as an ally? And if you immediately just go, oh yeah, no, we're going to kill you anyway. I know that this is a very like well-established rule. It's been around for literally thousands of years, but we're just not going to do that. Your house is dead. You think you're doing something because you're making a pact with what you think is the winning side. They're going to thank you for fucking yourselves over so they win, but you are never going to be able to scrape your reputation back together. So anyway, I just loved this. Sabe is like, get it back because it cuts off there. Can't do it. And poor Mackerel is like really exhausted by this, and Hugh has to give him a little break because he apparently doesn't know when he's connecting to these communications, but it does take a lot out of him. And Sabe tells Hugh here, look, first of all, this has made me think more than anything you've said that Candoran is still alive. Like, I know that you acted like Mackerel, it was all an accident. I don't buy it. Candoran is helping you somehow. And this is her doing that for you. And I don't recall if I said maybe Candoron had wanted Hugh to see the thing. I think that I maybe threw that out there as an outside chance, but I don't think that I really believed it. And Sabe suggesting here that it was all completely on purpose, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe, yeah. You know, it's the sort of thing that for me, I would be like expecting her to say, so what'd you think of such and such that you read? But she just sort of leaves it, and I'm wondering if it was a bit of a test. Like, I want you to have this info. And I also am curious if you are going to be honest with me about the fact that you got an inside look, or are you going to keep that shit to yourself? You know, maybe just sort of get the size of Hugh and how he would react and how honest he is with her. So there's a really interesting moment here where Sabe finally says something about the coup. And Godric is like, a coup? What are you talking about? And I'm like, oh my God. All this time has passed and she hasn't even told them. And Godric indeed is just like, how did you not let us know about this? And when she says, well, your dad thought it wouldn't help if you knew, Godric is like, wait, what? Is he was involved? And she's like, no, he just figured it out. And he seems to relax, like completely back to normal as she apologizes. But Talia then chimes in, well, you know, if I were in a book, I would make a big deal out of this and it would create a schism in our friendship and la, 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 la. And I really appreciated this acknowledgement because, that is the move. There is no greater giveaway of a writer's lack of imagination than little bullshit things causing people to stop speaking to each other. It's just the kind of, it's so cheap and lazy. So I liked this acknowledgement, and that Talia is like, I don't really see what telling us would have changed anyway. So it's fine. I don't care. Hugh, meanwhile, is off to the side kind of going, guys, what? Really? You're just going to let it go? And he gets so mad. But then he has to admit to himself that he had his suspicions about all of this, and he actively buried his head in the sand and did not want to know anything. So he just kind of is honest with himself about this. And I really appreciate that, especially because it is a really common thing for a person to bury their head in the sand and avoid seeing what's right in front of their face. But then once they can no longer ignore it, flipping shit completely with this intense moral superiority when it feels more like they're putting on a costume of somebody who should be outraged because there was no way they didn't have a sense of what was really going on. So they almost are milking the fact that they have plausible deniability to get more angry than is rational and manipulate the other person through that. And I've seen this firsthand a couple of times. It's a really tricky thing because you can know perfectly well they were aware. I know they were, but you can't prove it. And so it's a very difficult assault to defend against. And I just, listen, I appreciate Hugh being like, I just straight up didn't want to know. I guess that's it. This is also a thing with spouses of people who are serial killers or mothers and fathers of serial killers. It's once you start to talk to them, they fucking were aware. They knew something. There were things, and they just pretended it couldn't possibly be that. and then act as shocked as anyone. And it's sickening because you're like, come on, you had every opportunity to step in here and you just straight up didn't. Anyway, sorry, I'm comparing Sabe to a serial killer. I don't mean to, but you know what I'm saying. So Hugh says, I don't think I ever would have suspected that Alustin would betray us. And Sabe is like, I barely did. I suspected he might let his plans get in front of our best interests, but not that he'd actively hurt Hugh. And as we hear later, Alustin's very defensive about whether or not he was even like meaning to hurt Hugh. He tries to say that Hugh was never in any danger. But so I got to get through this because I have almost no time left and there's a whole other chapter to talk about. So they go to the 7th floor has this weird like metal, but it's not metal. It's a weird material and none of them can figure out what it is. And it's super dark and they wind up going up against this slug monster here. They find the door through, which she was like, if Mackerel weren't here, there is no way in hell we'd ever have found this. It took several minutes to figure out how to safely open the door without breaking through it, something Hugh didn't want to do if they could avoid it. And they find this room full of ether crystals, which Hugh takes one, but apparently they begin to like grow once they're taken out of their regular environment, and the more they grow, the less valuable they are. So it's like, even though he could make so much money by looting this whole room, it's too risky. Not only do they grow, but they interact with each other. And so it just gets very weird. And he takes only the one. Then we go to a gravity optional floor. And Talia is vocalizing that it's a bit, she's offering that it's a bit anticlimactic. She was hoping that they would really get put through it and see what they could do, and it just doesn't really seem like things are up to par usually, or as they usually are. So Hugh mentions about how labyrinth stones are like fruit and they can help create areas of that are mana wells. They can turn them into new labyrinths. And Godric asks if Mackerel tries to sprout new labyrinths, and Mackerel is so offended. But Hugh's theory is that Mackerel might actually be a teeny tiny labyrinth. And everybody is like, holy shit, are you serious? And Hugh's like, yeah, I think Alustin found some way to like make a labyrinth stone into a portable labyrinth. He figured this out. Excuse me, guys. So they spend some time here talking about Alustin's plans, and we find out, I don't know if we knew this already, but that Havath City is protected by a bunch of liches whose domains overlap and are intertwined, and they are called the Intertwined later, I think, by Edmondson. But they can't figure out, like, the Tongue Eater isn't going to be enough to destroy, like, he wants to destroy Havath and then kind of get at everybody else. Is he just planning to use it outside the city? Like, what? And Sabe's like, no, he's setting up, like, a real, actual attack, and it seems like it's legitimate, so I don't really know what the hell he could be up to. So finally, they get to this spot with the tunnel. The spellform started being interrupted by odd, unconnected markings arranged in rows and columns. They defied every principle of spellform design that he knew. They weren't interconnected at all, but instead were like constellations of dots, small enough and close enough to one another that you could mistake them for spellforms or letters if you didn't know better. And the ether is starting to get difficult to breathe. They're having headaches and like nausea. So all of this is a signal they're on the right track. And then this chapter ends with Hugh did his best to ignore the pain as they passed out of Anastas and began descending into the labyrinth of another world. And I was like, oh man, a whole other world. This is more serious than I was expecting. So now we go to chapter 19. Guys, Alustin's combo of powers is it's so fucking terrifying. So the ink and paper affinity together is already very significant. It's not an unusual combo, but he is so creative with the paper affinity that I feel like he's already several steps ahead. And then adding his farsight affinity, he can just change what papers say from hundreds of leagues away. Look, I'm sure that there are plenty of wards and spells and stuff that you could put on written paper to ensure he can't do this. But the fact that you now have to worry about that when you're dealing with this dude is so annoying. I cannot think, like, the sheer number of possibilities of the havoc that he could wreak with this one ability, if it were in a complete vacuum with no combat capabilities, that is already, it's basically like being like a computer hacker. You can just go in and make shit say whatever you want, you know? And like, this freaked me out. Also, it's like really good training for him to be able to like get better control over this affinity because it's new to him. And I just can't, you guys, I just can't. It's too much. So we have a great moment here where he is thinking about the differential effect. When you had mana reservoirs of radically different sizes, you could use the differential in a variety of ways to force growth. The mere presence of the differential was enough to speed mana reservoir growth, which was part of why mages with 5 or more affinities tended to become great powers at such a high rate. When you had that many magics to practice, some inevitably fell by the wayside and the differential effect would kick in. It was more complex than that, of course. The effect seldom worked for mages below Archmage level because it was a derivative of how much mana a mage could safely channel into a spell. Alustin was fairly sure the differential effect would kick in for Godric sooner or later, given the size difference between his increasingly huge stone mana reservoirs and his tiny scent reservoir, and he was looking forward to... He quickly ended that line of thought. I appreciated this moment a lot, because I need to be reminded that Alustin is grieving the loss of his students. It's not the same, and it's not enough to make me like forgive him for anything, but just knowing that he falls into the pattern of believing that their future is going to be together as a team still, even now, I appreciate it, because it's like the way our minds work. We get into a certain sort of groove of thinking and we find it difficult to get out of it again. And I've really felt for him in a way here, having to like stamp on his feelings. So we have the conversation between Amundsen and Alustin again. And I say again because there's a lot of like recovering some ground that we had already, but it turns out that there's somebody listening. So they're kind of doing this as a bit of a performance. And the whole argument here, Amundsen is just really concerned about whether they're going to be able to pull this off, because they are not an army. They're all like individual, basically independent contractors, and they are not made or trained to work together. But Alustin has a relay golem that he has been working on, and he's finally gotten a small one to operate correctly and is going to size it up. I have no idea how that will work. But then there's planting enchanted devices across the city to prime the ritual and defend or hide them long enough for the ritual to work. which these are resonators, and Alustin has told them that this is going to be something to do with the chitin wand, but it's actually resonators for the tongue eater, which, imagine if he pulls this off, how incredibly, like, wouldn't you be just so devastated? You were setting something up thinking it was going to be used one way, and somebody does something psychotic like that. Like, oof, man. And Alustin also says that he's already activated the last echo, that if he dies tomorrow, it's still going to do what it do and open a gap in Havath's defenses. And the paper mage had activated the last echo, but it wasn't just like flipping a switch. The more time and resources Alustin dedicated to it, the more powerful it would grow. Even now, it should hopefully be enough, but Alustin had zero intention of leaving it up to chance. And I'm like, what does that mean? I don't know what you're doing, Alustin. So then we have this moment where Emonson asks, do you regret it? And Alustin answers as if he's asking about Canderon. And he's like, no, you're apprentices. And Alustin gives a bunch of justifications as to why it's fine. And I did what I needed to keep them safe. And Emonson is basically like, yeah, but you are full of shit. Like, you're acting like you protected them. They're out there now being made into weapons regardless of all of these fake I protected them things you did. Get out of here. You're not going to fool me, sir. You threw them away. They weren't of use to you, and you just fucking bailed on them. And when Emonson leaves, Alustin is sitting there struggling because he knows Emonson's right. And he says, "Taz it to him," and realizes, again, he has used a word that he doesn't know. And he's like, oh, motherfucker. It says, it was only the third or fourth time, fifth at most, that the tongue eater had forced a new word into his mind, and they'd all been obscene so far. It shouldn't be surprising that an artifact as powerful as the tongue eater leaked a bit, and it had been harmless so far. Oh boy. Alustin, I don't know how to tell you this, but you in danger, girl. You are handling some shit that you clearly don't understand. I don't know why you thought you knew, but it's very clear you didn't. Fifth time at most. I'm gonna say it's seventh time. Just gonna go ahead and not believe you. When you're trying to tell yourself shit you want to believe, you always make it sound a little bit better. Like, I don't believe you. You're lying to yourself. You're lying to me. And all that's going to happen is you're going to screw yourself with this. So good luck, sis, because that is about to explode and wreck your brain and just flatten you. Oh, boy. So yeah, that's the end of the chapter. I'm over time, so I really have to wrap. But thank you guys for coming. Sorry about the confusion on where the event was being held. Appreciate you being here anyway. Hope that y'all are enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.